Hi, I'm Bobby. Those sirens you hear are not FX or even sound effects. Those are actual sirens that are in the background here for one of our Hangout participants today. Seems like we get a little feedback from you, Eric. The toolbar, because we're getting feedback off yours there. So anyway, welcome to today's Google Hangout. Today is the fourth Wednesday of the month. And from this point forward, on Wednesday, we're going to have Frank Ricci and PJ Norwood. We're going to host safety and safety issues in the fire service. So we're going to cover everything from toxic smoke to today we can cover EAP to PPE, to falls, everything under the sun that has to do with health and safety. So we couldn't imagine two better guys to do that for us. Quick commercial before we begin. We've got FDI 70 days away, and can't wait to see you all there. The classes are filling up fast. We've got a few hot sessions that have already filled up. So we hope you, if you want to get into some of those hot classes, please sign up now so you can be sure to get the class you want. If you're going to be taking any of the workshops, those are also starting to fill up. Remember, we've got 21 hands-on training classes. 21 different sites, everything from collapse to live fire to live burn studies. It should be fascinating. We're also going to be doing all kinds of extrication classes, and several of those do have several sessions already filled up. There'll be 80 workshops. Those are also Monday and Tuesday. They're all 4-hour workshops. And then there are going to be 200 classrooms from Wednesday to Friday, and then over 1,500 exhibits. So we're anticipating around 35,000 firefighters, which makes it the world's largest training conference in the world, and the largest firefighting conference in North America. Great deal. So come to Indianapolis and have a great time with 35,000 firefighters. Who's America's instructor, and outstanding time. With that, I'll introduce our hosts for health and safety issues in the fire service. And that is the ever effervescent and lovely Frank Ricci and his sidekick Pancho Sansa, also known as PJ Norwood.
Welcome. Today we have Jim Rascati, who's our EAP provider for the city of New Haven and the Connecticut region. EAP seems to be one of those buzzwords or phrases that you throw out in a promotional exam, but when you really get down to it, a lot of the individuals out there that are using these key phrases really don't know what EAP has to offer. And I'll say I was naive about it throughout the process. Got to know Jim over the years is every time I talk to him, I learn of a new service that we can provide to our members. So let's start off with Jim just giving a brief overview of EAP, Employee Assistance Program, and then we'll dove down into detail.
Great, thanks, Frank. Yeah, employee assistance programs began about 50 years ago to provide counseling for employees in the workplace. Today, most EAPs work with not just the employee, but the family member. So that can be the husband, the wife, the partner, and the children. So that's number one. Although they're called employee assistance, it's really for anyone in the immediate family. Number two, although EAPs initially began dealing with alcohol, they deal with any issue. So not just mental health and substance abuse, family issues, financial worries, stress. EAPs provide confidential services in terms of the counseling. So that's the other stand. Although an employer or a city or a fire department will provide an EAP, they are confidential services. However, there's 3 exceptions to confidentiality: danger to self, danger to others, child or elder care abuse. So that's number one, the counseling services. The other thing that EAP should provide, especially for first responders, are training programs. From substance abuse awareness to supervisory training to communication, conflict, diversity, any of those behavioral topics. The third thing that a good EAP should provide is critical incident or response to psychological first aid. I'm sure everyone in this audience knows what that is. God forbid, death of a firefighter, a horrific fire, a family dies, an EAP should be able to respond immediately and come on site and to meet with those first responders, those firefighters involved. So that's like a quick overview of the services available.
Now, when we talk about providing the services, our listeners are professional firefighters and professional volunteers, and a lot of volunteer departments don't realize that, and it's going to vary from place to place, but they don't realize that they have access through the town or municipality. How does a fire officer or a volunteer chief go about finding out if there's that connection or making that connection with the town?
Great question. Well, I have 18 paid firehouses and 5 volunteers. So those 5 volunteer fire departments, their town has made a decision, even though they're volunteers, to provide this as a benefit. So for those members of volunteer fire department, talk to your mayor, first select person, someone in your municipal or local government to see whether or not that is a benefit that they are willing to provide or should be providing for their members.
Now, explain the difference between the services you provide and the peer networks that you set up with peer providers. And we could probably bring PJ into the conversation as well. But can you speak to that, Jim?
Sure. As I said, we work with over 24 different towns and municipalities. Every time we take over a town or municipal contract, the 2 departments least likely to use EAP services are cops and firefighters. It has a lot to do with the culture, all sorts of issues. So I get the fact that a cop or a firefighter may not want to talk to a mental health person. They may feel more comfortable talking to a firefighter. Well, I started police peer support 9 years ago. Never had a fire department willing to do fire peer support for whatever reasons. Much more of a closed culture, even in law enforcement. That all changed 4 years ago when Lieutenant Vasquez and firefighter Bake died in Bridgeport. At that time, Lieutenant Rick O'Brien from the Boston Fire Department Peer Support Critical Incident Team called the chief, offered to do a debriefing. They came down there and I did the debriefing with them. We had our first fire department peer support, comprised of New Haven and Bridgeport firefighters. A year later, we had our second training. Deputy Chief Norwood and some of his brother firefighters from New Haven were involved. We now have 6 fire department peer support teams that are part of the EAP. And for my benefit, it's instrumental. When I do get called for a critical incident, I have the members of those teams available to join us.
And one thing that I've seen is that it's not always a firefighter injury or a line of duty death. We had a piece of apparatus involved in a motor vehicle accident. A motorcycle came out of a city street while they were responding and smacked right in the front of the apparatus. The individual, needed critical care, and the services that your agency provided were phenomenal for our members. So it's not always just something critical as a firefighter getting hurt. It could be, if anything that could be viewed as traumatic, you or peer support could help, correct?
Absolutely correct. And one of the difficulties you get in any engine house, you have different firefighters who respond to stress differently, right? So we may be involved in an incident, you may not be troubled by it, but another firefighter may. So one of our protocols, what we recommend to commands of fire departments, is that any critical incident, call us, and we'll come down, because our experience is, whether it's that incident where the motorcyclist got hit by the engine, if you ask a group of firefighters, do you want to meet with the EAP, our experience is inevitably they're going to say no. So we recommend call us. When we do a debriefing, we'll say you don't need to talk, and very seldom do we have debriefings where people aren't talking about the event.
And in that instance, no one wanted to talk to EAP when it was initially offered, and I talked to the chief, and I got to give credit to the chief because I said, let's get this company off duty, and the chief said absolutely, covered the company, got him off duty, and then it turned out that a lot of individuals came to seek counseling, not only on the day of the event, but we also set up at the training academy an option, and then I'll go to PJ with this, but an option of after the event, EAP is going to be available for you at the training school at a pre-described time, and it's up to you whether you come or you don't go. And we had several individuals who originally said, no, I don't want to talk to anybody. They came, and I think that that's important, that you always put it out there. Even if your members are saying, no, I don't want it, give them the opportunity to have it in place. Now, PJ, you had an experience with a plane crash. What was your experience with EAP?
Correct. Being a combination department, we have many unique opportunities in our department. We have, explorers from 13, 15, 16 years old to volunteers who have been in the service from 1 year to 30 years plus. Plus, we have the career staff. So we had a small plane crash into 2 residential homes, killing 4 people total. And we had a wide range of emotions, from the explorers to the volunteers to the career staff. So being able to bring them all together and whittle our way through to see the different types of reactions from the wide variety of employees and volunteers that we had there, and then channel our energy more focused into those who really needed help. Getting back to your incident with the engine hit the motorcycle, being part of the peer support team there, which I think is very key to this. All members of the company and I believe the battalion chief, the deputy chief on duty that day showed up, and they were quite relieved. Nothing personal, Jim, but when they came into the door and you weren't there, that it was just myself and another firefighter, sit down with them and talk about the incident and help them understand what's normal, what's not normal, when talking is enough, when additional services should be sought out or sought. So I think the peer support is key, but also backtracking a little bit farther. What's even more important is training. Training before these incidents happen. We can't expect our members to show up at a debriefing or a peer support if they don't know what it's about.
Right.
And after an emergency hits or after a critical incident is not the time to try to explain that to them.
Right.
It's doing this on the front end and getting them to understand what EAP is, what peer support is, what critical incident stress is and is not, so they know the role of the responders and the psychological first aid if and ever it's needed.
Yep.
I'm going to go to Bobby Hall so he can weigh in on this, but one thing I also want to say for the company officers out there, you may not be having an issue with it, but as a leader, your shift is looking at you for guidance. So anytime there's an incident in the city, I always recommend, even when the officer says, well, I'm not having an issue with it. Yeah, but you don't know. It could be that your personnel are holding back because they're looking for you for that leadership. So sometimes as the boss, you got to take the first step forward to ensure that your crew's taken care of and kind of hold the door open for everybody, go in there, participate, and realize that sometimes there may be that individual that's just kind of holding on. I don't know whether I want to go or I don't. But if the company goes and says, hey, let's do this as a company, it builds that camaraderie and it lets everybody know that they're not alone in this situation. I'm going to go to Bobby, and then Bobby, we can pass it to Eric.
Well, and I wanted to remind everybody who's listening right now that you can ask a question anytime. Just do a hashtag FETalk. That's hashtag FETalk on Twitter. And Brandon, our producer, will get those questions to us through our electronic devices, which are never far away. Doc, is that some kind of new thing we should be looking out for? The device phobia. So, I think I think that this topic is obviously very important to me. I'm a member of the Florian Society, and that's a place where firefighters who need to go for alcohol or drug counseling or mental health can go, and it's just for firefighters. It's run by the Rosecrans Foundation out there in Chicago, and they've been doing great work. But I think that the more I learn about firefighter mental health issues and what we do, I think that for many, many years we've kind of downplayed just how stressful the role of the firefighter, the law enforcement officer, really is. Very few people have to deal with people going through such tremendous crises on a day-to-day basis. We might say, oh, it was just a heart attack. You come back from a call. Well, someone lost their life. And you were there, and you saw that grief, and you saw the family member's reaction, and you were with that person in the last few seconds of their lives. That whether it takes a toll on you immediately or cumulatively, the jury's still out, but we know it does, and we know everybody, just like our toxin thresholds and our cancer thresholds, we're all wired a little bit differently. So what might affect me very deeply might not affect the guy standing next to me. Years ago, I had a call where 2 little towhead boys were playing with a little electric car out in the street. Dry lightning hit him, went through the top of one kid's head, came out his chest, hit the other kid, killed the one kid, and really blew the toes off the other kid. Raced back to the fire station, called my wife and said, get the boys in the house now. And she said, why? There's not a cloud in the sky. I said, I don't care. Get them in the house, And that was a direct reaction, immediate reaction, which is healthy. And not realizing it at the time was immediate reaction. But we all have them. I know I've had delayed reactions to certain things I can't I don't like to be around anymore from calls in the past. But I think what's interesting, and I'd like to ask Jim about it, as the clinical clinical therapist, right? Jim, is that correct? Am I?
Social worker, correct. Clinical social worker. Yep.
You know, there's a misunderstanding among all of us that we assume that the folks who are going through this want to talk about it and want to get help, and that's not always the case. One of the things that we see very frequently is that they don't want to talk about it, because when you really think you're losing your mind, or you really are starting to deal with stuff, or you're starting to have issues, it can be extremely frightening, and you really don't want to share it with people. So I guess my question is, how do we connect with some of our firefighters who we may be seeing changes in, or we may be seeing that something did affect them, or we feel they are, but they really don't want to participate. I mean, they don't want to talk to you or the group, or they don't want to go to peer counseling, and they're adamant about it. I mean, can we? I guess it's the twofold question: how can we help them to connect, and then can we potentially do more harm than good in saying stuff like, "Well, I'm ordering you to go," or "We're all going," or stuff like that? Because I mean, I don't think we realize people are really like China dolls. They're really fragile, and if you break them, you know, as the great general said, you know, if you break it, you buy it. So I'd hate to break anybody.
Yeah, that's a great question there. So in terms of the psychological first aid of the critical incident, there's a fair amount of controversy in psychiatry whether this is contraindicated, whether it makes matters worse. And I think those are valid concerns. Having said that, I think there's a lot of research that really talks about who's doing it, what their training is, how familiar they are with your culture. Because I always say this, cops and firefighters are different than any other client group I work with. In all honesty, you guys can be a challenge to work with. So the important thing for me is education. Deputy Chief Norwood mentioned that. People need to be made aware that you may, underline may, have a reaction to this event. It may not be today, it may not be next week, it may not be for 3 months from now. Okay, because what we do, and we all do this, we file things. So you're absolutely correct. Someone may not be ready to talk about it today, but there may be an event that occurs, what we refer to as a trigger, 3 months ago, 6 months from now, or a year from now, that brings them back to an event that they never really processed. So a couple things. One is, I think it is really important that when there's a critical incident, EAP should be called immediately. Even if it's just to touch base with those firefighters. Just to say hello, here's my card, schedule a formal debriefing a couple of days later, typically within 24 to 72 hours. When we do those debriefings, we do say, we know you may have been required to be here, you do not need to talk. And that's where having some group background is beneficial, because you can't force people to talk. Because some people may not want to. The benefit of peer support, going back to the incident that Frank mentioned about the motorcycle being hit by an engine on their way to another call, I met with those guys within an hour of that event. That was followed up over the weekend with PJ and members of his peer team meeting with them at the training academy. So they had a mental health professional one day, followed up by peer support the very next day. And we have the same sort of information, but they're probably more likely to hear it coming from PJ as a firefighter than me. And that's the marriage. That's the benefit of an integrated EAP peer support team. The other thing about, there's a reason why first responders, cops, firefighters, military, all have higher rates of divorce, higher rates of alcohol abuse, higher rates of acute stress and PTSD. Is, generally speaking, in none of your training has anyone taught you how to deal with the emotional, psychological impacts of your job. So we need to change the culture, and both Frank and PJ talk about education, and that's valuable. You're not less of a firefighter if you have a reaction to some horrific thing you just seen. So the more we can normalize the experience, the more other firefighters are available to share those experiences. That's what's going to help people.
Bobby, one thing I'd like to bring up is our department used to be anti-EAP. I mean, it's just a typical New England city department, and we've been pushing to get EAP in there like right after the event. And what we're finding is now that management has kind of embraced it now, and there's been a change in the culture, just get an EAP there so that everybody knows, oh, EAP showed up after the event. Even if nobody talks to them, they know it. They know that they're there. And then we found great success with then setting up another date and giving everybody the option to attend. So it's been real enlightening now that we got a new administration and they're kind of embracing it. We still got a lot of work to do, but I think we're on the right track.
I've done more debriefings in the last 6 months for the New Haven Fire Department than I've done the previous 9 years.
Wow.
Because there's a change in culture.
Wow. You know, I have to ask. I don't, Eric. If you have a burning question, just jump in, buddy. Remember, it's a hangout. Don't wait for me to invite you, little brother. But there was a lot of discussion when I was a young firefighter, young officer. We went through the whole critical incident stress debriefing, the Doc Mitchell deal. And when I worked at Ground Zero, there was some of that going on. I didn't participate in any of it because I just didn't feel like it there. But A, I didn't feel like I needed it, and A, I just didn't feel like it. So it was interesting, though, talking to some of my friends that were there who did. It was like you said, Doc. The jury's out. You know, for some of us, talking about it was good. For some of us, like me, I don't want to talk about it. But I guess is that part of what you're talking about? Because I hear you keep using the term peer support, which is something different. Peer support is not like critical incident stress debriefing, right? It's a different methodology.
Well, there are some. Like for Boston Fire Department, it's a critical incident peer support team. So in Boston, under the Lieutenant Rick O'Brien, they do both. They provide fire department peer support, but they've also been trained in critical incident debriefing. My teams, the 6 departments I work with, PJ's one of them, we have them in New Haven, we've not trained them in critical incident, but they're part of a peer support team. So basically is when there's an event, when we get called, I send out an email typically to members of the peer support team, letting them know this is happening, can you join us? So it's an integrated response. It's a mental health professional who does the EAP, who's been trained in psychological first aid, along with fire department peer support members.
Chief, I'm going to just chime in here as being on the receiving end of the peer support, but also being on the leading side of the peer support. It's just like we're doing here. You grab a cup of coffee, grab something cold to drink, and just sit around the kitchen table. And if somebody wants to talk about an incident, somebody talks about an incident. Sometimes the conversation isn't even centered around the specific incident they just had. It may be just sharing some experiences that the members of the peer support have had in the past. This is, what I went through. This is how it affected me. This is how it affected my family. So, hey, man, be careful. This is how it can affect you. Usually that conversation is pretty short, and usually 1 or 2 of the members will jump in and talk about the incident a little bit. But at no point, because I'm not a believer in forcing anybody to be involved, to speak, or even to be involved and show up. It's just an opportunity to say, hey, we're going to be here. We're going to have a cup of coffee. We're going to have some lunch. And if anybody wants to join us and talk or not talk, just show up. We're here for you. And I've seen good results with that. I've seen good results from the Mitchell model, but I've also seen some negative results from that Mitchell model where we require, we force. Because that's not going to be good, especially us firemen. Nobody's going to force me to attend, and nobody's going to force me to talk. But when we show up and, hey, we're here for you if you need us, have a cup of coffee and let's just sit around and chat. I've seen some really good results with that, especially when it's not involving the psychiatrist and the shirt and ties and the suits, and it's just a bunch of firemen in uniform hanging out to chat a little bit.
And I really like the volunteer aspect of it, and I think that's why we're starting to succeed, is that we're not forcing anybody to go, but we're trying to, in a sense, steer them there, but let them come to their own decision. Right. And we just seen this. We just lost a firefighter very dear to us. Matter of fact, her picture's on the wall right behind us. Linda Cohen, an active duty New Haven firefighter, was found, and she passed on. And we offered, for the first time that I've seen it in the fire department, through EAP, we actually offered grief counseling, which is something that I only heard of like the schools doing when a kid gets passes on or a teacher passes on, where you can come to a location if you want to talk. And again, we did it voluntary, and our members, some of our members took advantage of it, and I received very positive feedback from it. Not everybody went, but people did take advantage of it. So I think that voluntary core message, it gets out there, and the more the officers and the leadership of the department buy into it, that it's not a negative thing, it seems to have a bit of a change.
Right. And just to comment on that, when they brought two of the engine houses together because the deceased firefighter used to work at both of these engine houses, and there had to be 12 firefighters there. Only 2 decided to not come, sat in another room, and that's fine. But what I want to point out at the very end, and most of these meetings that I do, you're talking about 20 minutes to maybe an hour. We're not talking about hours. Okay, it allows people in this case to talk about how shocked they were that she died, what a great person she was. But at the very end of it, there's an alarm, so they have to leave. So we ended a little bit early because there was a call. But one of the firefighters turned to me and said, "You know what I'm grateful for? That the chiefs give a shit enough about us that they had you here." Something along those lines, because they've noticed, again, as Frank is saying, a change in how command responds to these events. And he was thankful that the bosses cared enough about those guys to have someone come down and talk with them.
Eric, you got...
When we talk about culture here, and particularly in my department, it's changed considerably. Obviously, like Frank, my job didn't really bite on the AP as fast as they should have and adopt it. It was a citywide initiative, and unfortunately, we were one of the last to embrace it, if you will. But I think culture, it also speaks to who's on your peer support team. Obviously, when it started, they put the all call out, and it has a stigma of the do-gooders. It's the people looking to snag a decent spot in a bureau or a spot on a truck and get that nod. But I mean, if you look at the lineup on our peer support team, they're heavy hitters. They're well-respected officers. They're the guys and girls that you would have talked to anyway before we had an EAP, or a peer support team, I should say. So it's very enlightening to see that and see that change and generating these discussions. And I mean, we've all been there. I mean, when I started as a firefighter, even as a company officer, really, your peer support was immediately turning around and saying, "Everyone okay back there?" After a specific run, and that was it. And you'd have a few people that would say, "Yeah, you know what, maybe this one is bad." And I've been there where it's been a long silent ride back to the firehouse, and there's something wrong, and people are going to say it's okay, but we all, we damn well know it's not okay. It just happened, and I think that we have definitely, crested that hill, and we're now, kind of accepting this as part of the process and part of the componentry of our incidents. So. Hats off to everything you guys are doing and your approach out there. And I think it's not just catching on; it's been catching on. But to have that availability immediately is also a big part of the process as well. So definitely, getting the right people on our peer support team and getting those resources there right away. Those are our 2 big wins I think that we've seen. So.
Can I just add something? I know PJ mentioned the plane crash. PJ and the other peer support guy were working that scene. So as fire department bosses and firefighters, they can't function as peer support because they're doing fire suppression and all the other things. But I am convinced that because of PJ's involvement in the team, I got called within 45 minutes of the plane crash, was on the scene within a half an hour. What the active duty peer support East Haven firefighters did is introduced me to the first firefighters that arrived on the scene. Now, this is just to make a connection with them, and we did the debriefing a couple of days later. So I just want to highlight that's the other advantage. I think when a department has a fire department peer support team, that in and of itself is changing the culture. They're reminding senior officials that maybe we should bring the EAP in, and for me, that's a good thing.
I got a question here on online, and one of our listeners wants to know from you, Jim, when you see folks that are dealing with substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or pot, or drugs, Is it often related to some kind of, is it often related to some kind of stress or some kind of incident that they may have experienced? In other words, are you seeing a link between substance abuse and stress?
Well, generally speaking, yeah, there is. There's a connection between, because that's how I self-medicate. Okay, so if I haven't learned an adaptive coping mechanism, and I'm involved in a culture like law enforcement and firefighting where alcohol is pretty accepted, that becomes the means of dealing with stress. One of the things that when I teach Bridgeport and New Haven fire recruit classes, I pretty much tell people, you know, you can do what you want outside of work, but you can't be using alcohol and or substances as a way to deal with the stress. You need to find a more adaptive way to deal with it. So there's a clear connection between stress and substance abuse for anyone, not just for firefighters.
And something that I've seen, and I'm curious what Eric's point of view on this, the fire service, when I first came in, it seemed like, you know, alcohol, and then you had the marijuana trend, and then you had the cocaine trend, and now it seems that the trend that I'm seeing in New England is a pill popping trend that is just kind of taking over the old drugs. Do you see that, or am I off base?
No, it absolutely is. And again, not just relevant to first responders or firefighters. Alcohol remains the #1 abused drug in the workplace. #2 is prescription drugs. Okay. And it's a huge problem. And the problem you get into for command in fire departments is firefighters, after an injury, are being returned to work on heavy-duty pain medications that may or may not be appropriate. A lot of fire departments don't have light-duty assignments, but we had a situation years ago where a firefighter hurt on the job was returned to duty on a prescription of OxyContin and oxycodone. Really should not be functioning, at least driving a truck or being on the back of an engine with those sort of medications. And the issue for this department was they had a light duty policy, but they're covered portal to portal. So you can put that firefighter in the light duty capacity, but he or she shouldn't be driving to and from work because the city is still liable because they have portal to portal coverage. I don't know if that's true across the United States.
Eric, have you seen the problem with prescription drugs?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have. In fact, you know, it is rampant across the country. It's not just, I guess, the endemic to my department, but I hear stories. You know, everyone in this room here, we talk to firefighters from all over the country, and we say, oh yeah, you know, this guy just got jammed up for popping pills, or we didn't know this guy had a prescription drug problem. But you know, I think you know, some departments also don't have department physicians on their staff. And those that aren't trained to recognize that, which I think is another you know, thing we should advocate for during this talk, is pairing up with these healthcare providers and training them in the peer support and recognizing this and having access to their prescriptions and obviously you know adhering to all the HIPAA laws and everything like that. But it's usually the ones that you don't think have this problem do. I know one that comes to mind immediately. Fortunately, he's no longer on the fire department, and he was, you know, a well-respected firefighter on our job. You know, he was at my first company when I came on, and everybody liked him. Very good, very conscientious. Unfortunately, he had a problem that led to other issues. So it transcended pills. I mean, it was a very, very tragic situation. I think that could have been prevented. You know, had we had the ability to recognize that. Now, my fire department has a department physician on staff. You know, we do adhere to HIPAA and everything, and they do a great job. However, with our random drug testing, et cetera, our zero tolerance, usually these people are terminated before they get the help. So that's just our department policy. But I do think that it is a more widespread problem in the fire service. You know, a lot of us work the 24-hour shift. So, you know, essentially we're administering these medications to ourselves during that time. So, and then correlate that to the stress that we're seeing during the 24-hour shift, and it's just a recipe for disaster. So, I think that recognition is also a key component of the peer support and the critical incident stress debriefing process. So.
And there's a lot of departments out there that their drug testing doesn't pick up certain pills that people are abusing. Their drug testing is very limited. So that's an issue that we see. And we had a member of the department make an aggressive push into a basement fire, fell through the stairs and had a leg fracture, compound fracture, and he was prescribed pain medicine, and it ended up being his downfall. And I think that I testified at his court case, and for leniency for him. And I think that myself and everybody else that worked with the guy, we kind of failed him, because everybody just thought, oh no, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And next thing you know, he got jammed up on his part-time job, which carried over to the fire department. So I think we need to do a better job taking care of each other, and sometimes having that courage to come forward and say, maybe this guy or this girl needs help, because we all want to be the one, everybody's friend, and sometimes you can't be popular when you're in a leadership position. Let's go back to Bobby on that real quick.
Yeah, that's there's a fine line between being somebody's friend and being codependent or being an enabler, and I've had to walk that line personally in my family life, and it's very difficult, and it's something you need to weigh each situation very carefully. You need to talk to professionals like Jim on a regular basis. I mean, not just, people like Jim. Well, I think a lot of people should know, and Jim will back me up on this. These things don't go away with one quick talk or one quick visit, and these folks like Jim are like us. They're called. This is what they do. They want you to call. You got a question, call. You got a concern, call. It doesn't matter if you talked to them 45 minutes ago. Something pops in your head, call, because they can really help you make better decisions. And as a leader, as an officer, you have fiduciary responsibility, to the mission, which is to protect lives and property and citizens. So if you think you have someone who's struggling, whether that's alcohol, drugs, or even mental health, you have an obligation to your first priority, which is the protection of the citizens' lives and property, to make sure that you at least have this person evaluated. And that's a tough thing to do. You always want to try to have them go along with you voluntarily, but if you have to, sometimes you need to use the authority of your position to say, I've got a concern, and document your concerns. Obviously, you keep it private for HIPAA and everything else. You keep it confidential, but you make it clear to them that, hey, I've seen a change in your behavior. I'll tell you this is an amazing true story, kind of along the same lines. There was a young firefighter in Evanston, Illinois, and he started behaving somewhat erratically. So the guys kind of let it go for a while. And then he seemed very forgetful, and the guys kind of let it go for a while, and everybody figured he was having trouble at home. He just had a new baby, got 3 kids, his wife's not working. It's the usual stuff like all of us, a lot of bills, a lot of stuff going on in his life. So Robbie is getting a little more forgetful. Robbie just forgets to do this, Robbie forgets to do that. One day he shows up late for work, like 45 minutes late, and just has like this, I don't care about it. The company officer says, man, there's something wrong with you. You've radically changed. And this company officer really stepped out on a limb and said, I'm putting the unit out of service. We're going down to the city hospital right now, and I'm going to have you checked out by somebody. And Robbie's saying, I'm going to go home. You can't do this to me. He said, no, I can do this to you. You're here. You're on duty. It's within my legal rights. He was right. Took him down. They checked his blood sugar. It was fine. They checked his oxygen sat. It was fine. He was answering questions appropriately. Finally, one doc says, hey, would you mind if we just took a quick x-ray of your head? He had a tumor the size of a grapefruit inside his head. Yeah. They took the tumor out. That's my cousin, Robbie. Robbie Byrne, Evanston, Illinois. That's my cousin. If it hadn't been for that officer sticking it out there and taking a chance and saying, no, you're changed, man. There's something radically different. Robbie, that tumor would have killed Robbie. So you don't know. It could be something as immediately life-threatening as that. But say it was substance, say it was pills. Pills will kill you just as bad as a tumor. Alcohol will kill you. If you're abusing alcohol, it will kill you. Look at I don't care, your Mama Cass, Jimi Hendrix, the people the Pigpen from the Grateful Dead, they all drank themselves to death as young people. You don't have to be 70 years old and an alcoholic for it to kill you. Alcohol will kill you young, and we need to be I think as officers, Frank, it's a tough road. If you're an officer and you want to have friends, buy a dog.
But Bob, just to underscore that, you're absolutely spot on. What I've seen in some situations, officers don't want to be officers. They don't want to jam someone up. And yet, that's a perfect example of a guy showing changes at work where it had nothing to do with substances, but it was a tumor situation. So it's when I do training for fire departments, I pretty much tell the lieutenants, the captains, you got to act like a boss, because if you enable this behavior, at some day it's going to wind up in the chief's office, or worse yet, the guy's going to lose his life or lose his marriage, lose his job. So the other thing back about EAPs, they're prepaid. Almost all EAPs are paid for quarterly. So no one's ambulance chasing here. In fact, I was saying to Frank and PJ, I work with their departments. As a partner at Behavioral Health Consultants, we get paid whether any East Haven or New Haven employee uses these programs. There's better treatment today than ever before. There's no question about that. So we need to do more education. You need to normalize the experience that if you had a particularly bad day, talk to someone, and not often does it need to be mental health. It certainly could be someone like PJ Norwood and other firefighters who've been trained in terms of one of these things to look for in terms of behavioral health issues.
Doc, on the same thing, I just got a text from one of our firefighters, and he said, you know, and I think there's 2 points in there. He wants us to stress that volunteers need a regular relationship with their personal physician, especially you know, if their FD has no support program, that can help with referrals and questions about mental health or emotional health that can be addressed at the local doc when the "we can't afford it" statement comes up, and keeps us physically and emotionally healthy. And I think Eric said it really good earlier, that our whole attitude, I think, has changed as society's attitudes are starting to change about mental health. And we're starting to understand that mental health, just like our physical health, needs to be maintained. We need to eat well. We need to exercise. We need to meditate. For some people, they need to pray, because praying is a form of meditation. It's a form of, you know, reconnecting with our inner thoughts. You know, for many years, I think the socio-technical revolution, go back to the Industrial Revolution, but really when it got heavy, when it really geared up, I'd say probably in the early 1900s, people kind of lost that reflective, self-aware kind of moment because the pace of life got so accelerated. But I think what we're seeing now is a renaissance and a recapture of that need for deep thought, and I think the fire service is aware of that, because we really are fighting the war that never ends. I mean, my sons have been deployed, and then they go out and they fight. They go out for a year and they come home, or they go out for 6 months and they come home, but they come home. The firefighter, you really never leave the battlefield. I mean, you know, I'm going up to Anaheim. The IAFF is having its affiliates conference, and if I'm going down the highway and I see a wreck, I'm pulling over. You know, it's what we do. It's and Eric and I have conversations about this all the time. I'd like Eric to chime in. Is the fact that we're never off duty, and Eric and I were talking about this the other day. Really, you know, and I'm in my 60s. It wears you down, but it also builds you up. It's a weird, you know, Jim. It's a weird. They're all something like a symbiotic relationship. Although it wears us down, it fires us up. You know what I mean? I get up in the morning just excited as hell that I'm still in the fire service, and I know a lot of other people are still as excited as hell that I'm still here too, but not in a good way either. When's an old bastard gonna die? But you know, I guess my question, and I'm going to let Eric comment on it first, is that how do we find that balance? Because Eric and I have been talking about that, because both of us are so driven by what we do on and off duty, and we're struggling with it. And I'll let Eric chime in before you answer. It's kind of like a little personal EAP for me and Roden, little therapy for Roden here. You know, and he used to, when I met him 6 months ago, he had a full head of hair.
Actually, 6 weeks ago I had a full head of hair. But anyway, no, I agree. I mean, there is obviously some of the, I guess, the eustress they call it, where you know, there's good stress about the job, the challenges, everything that we face, and that draws us to this profession. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we are always on duty, not to sound cliche or corny or anything like that, but I'm sure everyone in this room here is pulled up to an accident. I've been on duty and pulled up to accidents and seen freeway accidents in front of me, in my Chiefs buggy. But I definitely think that it does have its impact. It definitely has its cumulative effect as well. But again, I think we're starting to reach out a lot more than we ever have. I personally know friends that don't look at the EAP anymore as kind of that place you go to when you get jammed up at work, and to save yourself from getting a couple more days off on your suspension, like it used to be. In all reality, is like I get 2 days in abeyance if I go to the EAP and talk to them about my anger issue because I yelled at this fellow employee. I think we've gotten past that in terms of the EAP's incorporation and how we're actually using it and using it correctly. So, but yeah, absolutely. I think when we look at the day-to-day stress, I think we need to look for those indicators in ourselves as well. That maybe we're taking a little too much on, and we have a lot on our plate, and then on top of the compounding incidents and years of service, yeah, I mean the tolls to be taken, and I think we are doing a lot better job of looking out for each other and looking for these effects, and that's attributed and a testament to those folks and our our social workers, et cetera, getting into these fire departments and doing this training and kind of catching up to other city agencies, departments, and occupations. So that's my two cents on that. So keep up the good work, folks.
Eric, if I can just add, you're absolutely correct. The old way was where someone was having work problems and a boss, a chief, assistant, whatever, would say, get your ass to the EAP or I'm going to suspend you. And that's why historically the EAP was seen as punishment. So I'm glad to hear your department's not doing that. We still have more education that needs to happen in other departments because it should not be seen as punishment. I always say this, and you're professional firefighters. You can't stop every fire. We can't cure every person. But the fact is, there's better treatment today than ever before. Whether it's marital stuff, depression, substance abuse, prescription drugs, there's absolutely better treatment today than ever before. And these programs are prepaid. And I know, Bob, you mentioned a volunteer wondered about the cost. EAPs cost anywhere from $15 to $40 per employee per year. So it's not a lot of money when you think about the services available through an EAP. So it really is not something that's cost prohibitive, because generally 3 to 8% of a workforce uses an EAP. So the utilization is not high to begin with. So even a volunteer fire department who's a volunteer, that town or municipality should be able to come up with some money to provide a EAP for those volunteer firefighters.
I want to move to another subject here that is dear to a lot of our hearts, and something Bobby gave a staggering statistic, so I'll bring him back on as soon as I'm done here. But firefighter suicide, I don't think that there's anybody in the fire service who hasn't been touched by it. And I have a personal story. When I was living in the firehouse in 1992, dating myself here, I gave a drill about carbon monoxide poisoning, and I came to work, living in the firehouse. I was bringing my bag in, and I looked on the back of my helmet, and my back of my helmet said Doc Kevorkian on it in letters. I'm like, what is this? There was 2 detectives, and they called me in the office, and it turned out that one of the members that actually took my drill killed himself with carbon monoxide in the church parking lot, and he had a gun in the car. So he changed his method. And, firemen, you got to love firemen, Doc Kevorkian. So they took me for years to live down that nickname. But it's something that I never was really exposed to. I still don't have a lot of information. And when Bobby told me the statistic today, that was kind of heart-wrenching. Bobby, can I go to you before we go back to Jim?
Yeah, it's a hugely important topic to me. There were 90 firefighters confirmed from the Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance run by Jeff Dill. If you want to go to a site where you can learn more about firefighter suicide, it's the Firefighters Behavioral Health Alliance. Just Google Jeff Dill or the Firefighters Behavioral Health Alliance. And Jeff does work with the APs and people like Jim and provides training and counseling to them about suicide and suicide issues. He's also a licensed clinical psychologist and a therapist and a social worker. Great guy. But he gave us those statistics that we documented last year, 90 firefighters that took their own lives in 2014. that's a staggering number, absolutely staggering number, and it's a very tough topic. We need to talk about it, and there's some things I think where there's some things that we say sometimes, and words are very powerful. Someone wrote a piece in another place, and they said, preventing suicide prevention, what to do. And the problem with that title is that the only people who can prevent suicide are the suicidees. In other words, you can do a lot of great things. I have a very, very close personal friend. I know he won't mind if I mention his name, Pat Kinney. He's a fire chief in Illinois. Sent his son to the best programs in the world, got him all the help he could, and his son Sean still took his life. Sometimes you know, we're going to come up short. We ran an article in December's Fire Engineering about a firefighter who went through EAP, went to counseling. Everybody helped them. They literally left no stone unturned. Took his own life. We're not going to win. Some fires are defensive. You know, as PJ said, some fires are just defensive. That's just what they are. It doesn't mean we failed. I mean, I hear people say, oh, every fire we go to is a failure. No, they're not. But knowing that you did all you can do is sometimes all you can know. And I guess I'll throw it to Jim. You know, we don't know. It's hard to measure the absence of something. In other words, people say, oh, this program's working because this didn't happen. Well, we don't really know that. But we need to keep trying. And we'll never know the people who didn't commit suicide because someone reached out or something changed. I've heard stories where people have said, you know, well, this happened, I was going to take my own life, and then this happened, and I didn't. So by all means, I don't want people to think I'm saying there's nothing we can do. We can do plenty. But I guess the question, or I guess what I'm saying, and I would want to have Jim validate it or give us some more information is, you know, other than sending folks for counseling, other than trying to help them, how can we really help those that are suicidal, or how can we, without making them feel, a lot of what they feel is a disconnect and a loss, a dissociation, and from their past lives, from themselves. How can we help them? What are some of the things that you do in EAP?
Yeah, a couple things. First and foremost, the people who are contemplating suicide, they see no future. They see no end to their suffering. And one of the most important things that lay people should know is if you suspect a loved one, family, firefighter, friend is suicidal, ask the question. A lot of people are concerned that, well, I don't want to ask Frank if he's suicidal. I don't want to give him the idea. That's a fiction. Okay, you're not going to give the idea. So first and foremost, if you have any concerns about a loved one, a brother fire, sister firefighter, ask them if they're thinking about killing themselves. That's number one. Number two, by far, many of the people who kill themselves are depressed, right? So here are the numbers. 1 out of 5 Americans are depressed in a given year, right? 1 out of 5. Half of them are not in treatment at all. The other half that's in treatment, half of them are in the wrong treatment, meaning they're just getting medications from a primary care physician. The clinical research is really clear. An affective disorder, any of the depressive disorders, are well treated with a combination of psychopharmacology and psychotherapy. So there is treatment out there. The problem we get to is, how do we get people there? And again, education, educating bosses in fire departments if they see changes with someone, how to approach them, fire department peer support. EAP should be visible and known. An EAP should not be known only when there's a debriefing. They should be involved. The department should know who their EAP is so that they feel free about accessing those services.
Joe, I think that's an important point you make, that we all know what somebody looks like when they come into work who's had too much to drink. But do our officers out there truly know what somebody that's depressed looks like, or what somebody looks like who's abusing prescription medications? We can all pick up on somebody who's had a little bit too much to drink and is coming in work. Right. But if I have a member of my department that comes in that's taken some prescription pills that he or she shouldn't have taken, they've taken too much, what do they look like? So are we really focusing our education, our officers, of what somebody who's depressed looks like versus somebody just having a bad day.
Right.
What does somebody who has taken too many prescription pills, what behaviors can they be exhibiting out of that or out of the ordinary? So we as officers, but also as firefighters, you don't have to be just an officer to recognize these traits in some of our brothers and sisters.
Right.
First, what should we be looking for? But then two, what do we do about it? And how do we handle it right? And that's a very big topic that we probably don't have really time to hit on today. But when we start, people start watching this Google Hangout, I would urge them to go to their EAP providers, go to their physicians or their department physicians, and start asking these questions and start educating the membership on these topics.
Yep.
But also look for the administration support, because many departments run into the hurdle and the stumbling blocks of not having the administrative support when an officer sees these problems and recognizes these problems. Yep. So like in Frank's department and my department, there are cultural changes, but we always look for the top but we do have to look to the top, but we also have to start looking to educate our officers on what they should be looking for and how to act.
Right. So PJ, a quick answer is any significant changes in someone's normal personality is a flag should go up. So the guy who's very talkative and now he's isolative, or conversely, the guy who never socializes is talkative, any dramatic changes in someone's normal personality, someone should be asking, hey Frank, you all right? What's going on? So, I mean, we don't have time to get into more extensive stuff, but I think that's a guidepost. Any significant changes in someone's normal personality, something's going on with that individual. And someone should ask them, you okay?
And the other thing that you'll see in the clinically depressed and the folks that are thinking about suicide is they tend to take less pride in their appearance. A person their grooming is one of the first telltale signs. So if you see someone and they're starting to who never had a grooming issue before, I mean, some guys and gals are just slobs, but if you see someone who suddenly isn't shaving or isn't washing their hair or isn't their uniform suddenly shabby and dirty, or not suddenly, but you're seeing that they're really just not taking any pride in their appearance any longer. That's a big sign. That's one of the big ones.
The other thing I would add, too, and there's a lot of signs that, as PJ said, another session we can get into some specific behaviors to be aware of, is most EAPs you can call for a consultation. So if you have concerns about a brother, sister firefighter, you should be able to call your EAP and say, hey, can I talk to one of the docs? I have a question. I have some concerns about a brother, sister firefighter. So you get some clinical insight into what's going on and how to approach that individual.
Jim, on that note, would you touch a little bit on family? Because we talked about that before we went on, but we really didn't cover it. So would you touch a little bit on family?
Sure, absolutely. Well, you all don't work in isolation. You have two families. You have the family that you work with, and then you have your biological family. So even though a firefighter, she may be doing fine with the stresses of their job, it's not uncommon that a family member worries about them. So as an example, when in Bridgeport, when they lost Lieutenant Vasquez and Firefighter Bake, we set up some meetings for family members because the wife, the husband, the kids, they may now be worried about their loved one. So it's not just about you, the firefighter, it's your family too who can be worried about your safety and stuff like that. And the other, sometimes we get into, if someone's drinking is getting out of hand, the wife is worried about him, the husband, the partner is worried about him. You can't force them to get into treatment. So the family should be made aware that most EAP cover counseling services for them too. And that's what we'd encourage. If I got a call from a wife or husband of a firefighter worried about their loved one and they can't get them to come in, they should come in and get some coaching and get some counseling as to how do you deal in that situation.
Wow. Well, Mr. Host, what do you think?
I think this was a great show. It's an eye-opening experience, and I think that our members out there listening and who read fire engineering, we got to realize that everybody who's part of the team has value and the work has value, and we need to take care of each other. You can have the greatest fire apparatus that money can buy, but it's still the firefighters that put out the fires. It's still the firefighters who's holding Mrs. Smith's hand, making the difference when someone's having a heart attack. So there's value in the work, and all our members have value, and we just need to make a conscientious effort to just do a little bit better of taking care of each other.
Can I add something quickly? My firm got called in to work with the Newtown Police Department 1 week after Sandy Hook. And in talking with those police officers, I'll never forget, one of those officers shared with me, he goes, "I envy firefighters." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I know when they have a fire or a critical incident, they all go back to the engine house and they sit around a table. And cops don't have that." And that's true of your profession. You inherently have that ability to support each other after an event around the kitchen table. But, and I always say this, sometimes people need more than that shoulder to lean on. So to have peer support, to have commanders who are cognizant of when does this person need more than what the kitchen table can support them. And that's what you want to happen. So those who need the professional intervention can get it.
Eric, do you want to add in?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, I guess to summarize, the stigma's gone, folks. The help is there. The help is also in your firehouses now with our peer support teams that are out there. Departments are getting, they're finding the right recipe for developing these teams and training them. Again, don't be the officer that has to lean back and do your peer support to the back seat. Find these indicators, recognize these I guess these variables, and sometimes like Bobby mentioned, with his friend, you can do everything, and sometimes the indicators aren't there as well. I know the last several individuals that I personally have known that have committed suicide that were firefighters, no indication that was going to happen. Were the variables there? Yeah, there was the loss. Some behavioral changes, etc., but they were very, very difficult to recognize even by close friends. So it is very difficult. We need to get in there and be a little more diligent. But I guess bringing this full circle to something Frank said in the beginning, it does befall the officer to kind of take that lead and ask the question, because all eyes are on the officer, and if the officer doesn't want to do it, some people are like, well, maybe we don't want to inconvenience the whole crew. But nobody's inconvenienced when the officer says so, because that's the officer's job, and that's how they're viewing that. So, great stuff today, folks. Obviously, we'll post some stuff on Firefighter Nation here shortly. I believe we already have some stuff up there with some related articles on stress and firefighter behavioral health, etc. So, great topic to talk about today, folks. Definitely something we need to bring up and discuss more in the future. And so happy to be a part of it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for fire engineering today. Thanks, Chief Holland, for coming on. Chief, we'll give you the last word, and then we'll end the Google Hangout for today.
Well, before I do the last word, Jim, if folks are listening now, especially volunteer friends that may not have EAPs and they have questions about EAPs, is there a way to contact you? Would you mind giving us a contact so people can reach out?
My email is jnrascati@bhcservices.com. So jnrascati@bhcservices.com is my email address.
PJ, Jim, and I will be writing a blog about today's show, so we'll make sure his information's there, and we'll kind of hit on some of the things today. I'm sure Jim wouldn't mind writing something up for me. So,
Jim, I gotta say it was very enlightening. It was a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot. I think it's critically important. It's as important as our physical health. It's as important as our skill sets. It's as important as anything, because it affects our mental attitude, which is probably the most important thing we bring to the firefight and to our customers when they need us. Just a quick reminder: remember, the first Wednesday of the month will be training with Steve Pegram and our good friend Aaron Heller. On the second Wednesday of the month, we'll have the Fireground with our good friends Bill Guston and Mike Dugan. The third Wednesday brings you Rick Lasky and myself and Eric Roden, Issues and Concerns in the Fire Service. And the fourth Wednesday going forward, from this point forward, will be hosted by PJ Norwood and his sidekick, Frank Ricci, who is two of our dear friends, and they'll be covering health and safety in the fire service. So please get ready for FDIC. We'll hope to see you all there. It's just right around the corner. It's going to be a knockout show. Both PJ and Frank will be presenting, so be sure you take in their presentations. They're both teach classes and be outstanding stuff as always. Frank, I'll let you close up as the new host of Health and Safety on Fire Engineering Google Hangout.
Well, this is the quietest PJ's ever been. He's probably been tweeting it out and on Facebook. So I'm going to let PJ have the last word. And remember, just take care of each other.
Frank, I'm just getting concerned that if I talk too much, Jim's going to ask me to lie down on his couch to end this session. And I've already been there, and I've had great successes. So, look, I really appreciate Chief Fulton's opportunity for us to host these once a month, and the support from Eric Roden. Jim, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Chief, you mentioned on something. We all have to look for a way to get away, to get off duty. A little physical fitness for everybody. A walk, a run, in the gym, do something. It's going to help us on the physical side as well as the mental side. And I think that'd be my take-home message for everybody for the next 4 weeks till we come back, is do something for yourself today that doesn't involve Twitter, Facebook, the internet, even if it's just taking a walk with your family or sitting on the couch and having a conversation or having a good meal over dinner. I think that will help us all.
Okay. Have a good day.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.